Okay, this is the lecture on the workbook exercises from Lesson 14. So if you open your book to Lesson 14, and this will be your first page, and we talked about atmospheric perspective and three-point perspective in the last YouTubes. And if you turn the page, we then talked about circles in one-point and circles in two-point perspective. Now, if you turn the page again, what you'll have is here's two of the exercises in the workbook, and then here's the third one. So we'll start with this one. Now this one is drawn in the book, while this one is cut out. As you see, this page is blank, and this one is also cut out, and the directions are here because this page is blank. Okay, so we're going to start with this one, and first thing I want to point out here is that a circle in two-point perspective in this illustration here was right on the middle of the eye line, and the way that you can tell, there's two ways that you can tell. One is that this line is going down to the vanishing point, and this one's going up. So in that case, this particular rectilinear form and the cylinder that's lying down are on the eye line. The other thing is that they are equidistant from the two vanishing points, and you can tell that because this angle and this angle are equal. In other words, from the horizontal baseline, they are the same height. So I'm going to illustrate that. I'm going to redraw this one and then draw this one to show you where it is so that you'd be able to complete this. Okay, we'll start out with a vanishing point with a horizon line put up here. And now we'll start with two vanishing points for two-point perspective. And as I've always said, if we put these as far out as we can, then we have the widest range of our peripheral vision. Okay, so to illustrate the one that was on the previous page, where it cuts across the horizon line, we're going to put that one right in the middle. And you remember that anything that's equidistant in the middle, you can have a dashed reference line, and that's why I use it as a dashed line in case you're working with three-point perspective, so that you're completely in the middle, and then you keep track of things that are on either side. Okay, so now we have these, we've established two other points here for this particular piece, which are going to go over here and over here to that vanishing point, and then also over to this one. And I'm just, in a general way, I'm not extending them out to the points with a ruler, but I think you get the idea. Now, if you remember, we talked about the fact that about the width of a receding plane when you're starting out. If you make it only about half the height, in other words, you have this height here, half of that is this, and use that for your extension out here, so that this could be a square that is a receding plane. And that's a good start. I mean, because if you take it way out to here, obviously it would not be a square, because if it's a square, then when it's receding, it has to be taller than it is wide. Now, you could take it a little farther, but you don't want to make it square, and you don't want it wider than it is tall. Okay? So this way, it doesn't matter what we do over here, because it's a cylinder that's extended this way. So I'll just end it about right here. Okay, so what we did on the previous page is we had our diagonals, which gave us our halfway of the receding plane, which is not the middle. It's usually a little farther back than halfway because it's receding. Then you ended up with these 4 points, and on those 4 points you could then draw freelance if you only touched, I mean not freelance, but a freehand. If you only touched those 4 points, you would make a fairly accurate ellipse or receding circle, which has a foreshortened look to it, and then it appears to be an ellipse. Now, I'll use a ruler here real quick to show that, when you're going to this point over here, you don't necessarily go from this point to this point. Depending on the distortion of the circle, it's wherever the line is that you drew to make the ellipse. And that's where you're drawing from. And in most cases, it probably will be that top dot, but not always. And so you just want to be aware that you're not, you're receding on a curve, the part of the curve that is closest to the straight line, like this. So now, what you'll do is you'll have this center point, and in this case, what I was talking about was that, well, maybe that point is up here, but you can't really see it, and this one too. So we're just going to mimic this curve, and the circle has to be smaller, or the ellipse is smaller. And so we're basically drawing the whole thing, and I'm drawing it lightly on the right side there. And so the curve will be a little tighter because it's smaller than this one. And the transition here should be very smooth. And we talked about that in the last video, and I'm just repeating that. And I'm just going to draw over that. And the fact that you can't see this curve, you can't see any hole here because this one's longer. Okay, so now what we're going to do is look at, well, how is this one different than that? Well, it says in here that it's below the eye line. Well, how would you know that? Well, first of all, you notice how this angle goes up. You go, yeah, well, shouldn't the top one go down? Well, it doesn't. The top one also goes up. So if both of them go up, that means that this is now below the eye line. And then you look at these angles here. You notice how this angle is much larger than this one. So that means this is closer to the left vanishing point than it is to the right one. Those are the two keys for you. Now I'm going to draw this, but before I do, I'll show you that what you have here is you're simply supposed to complete the geometric structure around it. And you're given all the points, you're given the closest corner, and you're given the two receding angles. Now if you were to take an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and line it up with the bottom of this picture right here and put it right along the edge, you'll notice how, and I'll get it over here for you so you can see, the vanishing point is just on the edge of this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. But this one, as I'll illustrate for you here, is a lot closer than this one. So this one is probably 3 times as far away this way as this one is from that way. So you'd have 3 of these pieces of paper. And again, you know, the limits of perspective, in those limits, it's important for you to know what those limits are as you proceed on to further drawing classes. Okay, so we're on this eye line here. I'll put eye line. As you know, I'm using it interchangeably between eye line and horizon line. Now, the closest corner for this one is actually, since it's below the eye line and it's closer to the left one, it's probably going to be somewhere around in here. And so that line is this line. So now I end up with these 2 points, and let's go to this vanishing point. And now we're going to go over to this one, and you'll notice if I use an imaginary baseline, you'll be able to see the difference in the angles. And this is just for you to understand that that's how perspective works. And if you want things to be, they're more static if they're in the middle, like this, because they're even on both sides and they're also even top and bottom. That's not the best, probably the most dramatic point of view, and that's what you're learning about here. Now you notice how this one is larger than this one. That's because it's closer to this vanishing point, and as we talked about, the closer you get to the edges, the more dramatic and distorted the drawing will be. Okay, so now we're going to complete this rectangle and draw the, so you can see what this would look like. If you were drawing it first, in other words, what I'm asking you to do is to draw it backwards. In other words, you're deconstructing this from a picture so you can see how any real thing really does work, and they do follow the rules of perspective. So now this one has to go over to there, and this one has to go over to here. Again, the same principles here. Now we have our 4 points. Oops, we forgot this one. That one goes that way. Now, again, we'll now take this point back to there, or the curve at the farthest point out of the curve, and you'll see more dramatically how from this angle down here, the curve is a lot farther out than the dot. See? And that's because it's closer to that point, so you can't really use this dot anymore. So you have to use the curve as your starting point. You see that? Right here. Not this, because this would be inside there and that wouldn't work. Okay, so now you have the halfway point here. And again, just as in up here, you're now doing the circle, and it has to end inside of these two receding lines here and here, but it also has to touch here, right back here on this back point. Now again, I also said when you're back here, you should draw the entire circle that you think it would look like that will fit in there, because you never know when there might be a little observation here. You see how we're picking up the back of that hole right here? And that this is what's called just drawing through. So you're actually drawing extra lines, but you're really getting a more accurate curve here and an intersection of what that hole might look like. And so that's exactly what happens right here. So you're asked in here to finish this using the closest corner and these two receding angles by adding paper to each side, find the vanishing points. And this is basically what it would look like when you're done, is you're actually drawing this complete rectangular shape here that I'm reinforcing with a pencil here. Right there it is. Okay, well that's all there is to exercise 1. Again, you're doing it in the book. You're not doing this. You're doing it in the book and just completing this shape, but you will need to add paper to find the vanishing points. Okay. The next one we have is a 3-point perspective. And what I did for you is I've already cut it out here, and I'm going to show you a couple things, and then you're going to be able to just use that as a reference and then complete it. Now this is a little big for the screen, so what I'm going to show you, first of all, is that this is a real 18 by 24 piece of paper, and just let me move this around so you can see what's going on here. See how much it takes up that way? And then look this way, all the way down to there. Okay, so what I want to talk about right now, I'll leave the vanishing point in here, is remember that dotted line? Well, the dotted line gives you a perpendicular from which to see that, well, this is below the eye line, so the vanishing point is down here. You have to see how far it is by doing two things. First is take this one, follow these lines up this way to the vanishing point, and then these two this way to the vanishing point. Then if you make a perpendicular line, you'll see that this is on an angle, so this is off to the right of the center. And you can tell because you're closer to this vanishing point than you are to this one. So that makes sense. So now, what you need to do is you're going to follow these lines here, these three, down until they come together. And they'll come together at the vanishing point. You can do the same thing to these three corners of this box, and they will also go to the same vanishing point. Now what I would like you to complete beyond this is to take these lines from this container here and see if they go to the same 2 points. You also have this line here. Then you have these three, which will go to this point. Or maybe it goes to a different point, because remember, in 2-point perspective, they don't have to all go to the same 2 points. They may share 1 point, they may share both, or they may share neither one. So I want you to do, beyond this, I want you to complete the lines to this bottom shape. Just also the top and the bottom. Just like this one was on the top, although the bottom here you only had the one line, but you could also do that one. Okay, that's exercise 2. Exercise 3 is 3-point perspective. Now in this one, and I'll show you an example, you have to cut this out. And again, I'll show you this one just barely fits on the screen. And you can see the 2 vanishing points, the horizon line, and then the bottom vanishing point is way down here. Now what I did here, first of all, you'll notice that my dashed line that I'm using for a reference, again, you'll see here, we'll look at this, you'll notice how the baseline, you see how this angle is bigger than this one? That's because this is closer. This is closer to this vanishing point than it is to this one.